This is literally a formal proposal to create Emperor Palpatine. Like, that's what this is.
What?
It's incredible. It is incredible. Right down to how long it lasts. That's decided by the Secretary General. The participating actors, that's decided by the Secretary General. Their commitments that they have to uphold, that's decided by the Secretary General. Holding them to account if they don't actually fulfill the commitments, that's decided by the Secretary General. This is the Secretary General, in case you didn't know, is one person. Like, this is incredible.
So, Justin, you made it easy for me to include this as a topic this week because you recently had a piece published on The Federalist talking about it in an article titled "The UN is Planning to Seize Global Emergency Powers with Biden's Support." So let's approach this one thing at a time. Let's save the with Biden's support thing for later. So why don't you just start off by telling us about the UN's plan for seizing global emergency powers, or if you even want to go one step further back, we could just kind of talk about the Our Common Agenda plan, whichever track you want to take.
Yeah,
first.
So to avoid getting into the details of Our Common Agenda, what I'll do is just say that the United Nations, this thing that we're going to be talking about here, the emergency platform from the United Nations, it's one part of a massive, much larger plan called Our Common Agenda. And that emerged in 2021 in the wake of the COVID stuff and the rise of the Great Reset and all of that. While that was going on, the Great Reset, COVID lockdowns and everything, the United Nations started putting together this idea for Our Common Agenda, this massive, like Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. It's like that, but it's bigger than that even. And part of this huge platform, which we've talked a little bit about before, we'll talk about it again, I'm sure, is this emergency platform. And basically what the emergency platform is it's a formal proposal from the United Nations asking member states to give to the United Nations the ability to take huge amounts of control, power, authority in the midst of what it calls a global shock. And it defines global shock in the broadest way possible. And we can get into that a little bit more in a minute. But it defines global shock in the broadest way possible. And essentially what would happen is, in the event of a global shock, like let's say another COVID-19 type pandemic or a whole bunch of other crazy things, which are not even as serious as that, the United Nations would automatically, they wouldn't have to ask for it. They would automatically get the authority to start managing through public-private partnerships the economy, society, the kinds of goods and services that can be taking over the supply chain in certain instances and things like that. They're very vague about what they would be able to do on purpose, but the quotes here are incredible. I mean, essentially what they say is that they're going to they want the power to make all the participating actors in the crisis, which include public and private actors, have them make commitments, and then the United Nations has the ability to ensure that they are actually doing those commitments. So it's not just enough to say, well, this is how I'm gonna help, fight the COVID-19 pandemic. No, the United Nations gets to come in and tell you how you're going to do it or work with you in a stakeholder relationship. And then if you don't actually do what you said you were going to do, then they can somehow hold you to account. The United Nations. Okay. And so, and the crazy thing is, one of the crazy things about this is that it says very specifically that the time period for all of this is initially they will set the emergency for a finite period. Okay. So they'll say, all right, emergency platform time, and it's for 12 months. But after the 12 months is over, the Secretary General, the head of the United Nations, can unilaterally, as one person, come in and say, you know what? I think we need another 6 more months, and can decide on his own he's supposed to consult other people, but he doesn't have to listen to what they tell him. He can, on his own, just come in and say 6 more months, emergency platform continues, and on we go. I mean, it is truly a proposal for like an emperor like takeover of the Western world. Like, that's essentially what it is. It's amazing.
If you go through the common agenda, the things that they want to, like the policy type stuff that they want to have, like agreement amongst all the member states, ranges as broadly as you could possibly range it, all the way from interacting on the internet and having like a common code of conduct for the internet, all the way through, you know, like pandemic related stuff, as Justin was saying. Andy, pull that article back up, that Federalist article, because under the section that says like it gets worse. Oh yeah, just right there. Stop right there. It talks about the kinds of global shocks that could trigger an emergency platform. So thankfully, they give us a couple of examples, so we don't have to use our imagination too much here. But it says major climactic event. So, Jim, I don't know what that one is. A hurricane or something like that? I don't know how it would be global necessarily. Future pandemic risks, obviously, you know, have COVID-20 or something like that comes out. A global digital connectivity disruption. So worldwide internet goes out. Boom. UN is there to pick up the pieces. Major event in outer space. Again, that one, I guess, is left a little bit more to the imagination. I'm thinking aliens. Or, as Justin puts it, his personal favorite, unforeseen risks like a black swan event. So, Jim, I mean, when you see these organizations kind of laying out, oh yeah, all these things, this is what would trigger us, you know, grabbing hold of the emergency powers. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is, could you think of a worse time to bring something like a plan like this forward? I mean, right after all the lockdowns and economic destruction and the freedom destruction that was going on, even in the United States. I mean, it just triggers me. You know, it makes me think of you know, the what we used to think of as our free neighbors to the north in Canada, locking down the bank accounts of people who were just protesting very peacefully against COVID lockdowns and the destruction of their society and all of their freedoms. And they say, no, this is not. And he got away with it. I mean, Justin Trudeau got away with that. And of all the times to bring this up, you know, you might want to bring it up when there was a time of, you know, relative peace and prosperity, when there was, you know, not people kind of sensitive to this sort of power grab. You might bring it up if your exercise of power actually saved lives and stopped people from being infected by a global pandemic. If your seizing of power actually got to the bottom of how and where that virus came from and why, instead of us being lied to and gaslit for 3 straight years. And now is the time you come forward with your kind-hearted plan to take care of us, us scared little children of the world, in case something bad happens, like something that we won't even describe, maybe some other kind of calamity, or something in outer space, or the idea that the internet goes down and now we have to take all your freedoms away to protect you from each other. This is so scary. And actually, Justin, you deserve so much credit for bringing this forward, because I've seen this story being picked up, but it was after your story got in there. You in the Federalist is very well read publication. You were in the Federalist a lot. You're at Fox News a lot. You're in a lot of big publications. And it seems like when you put a spotlight on something, everybody else seems to pay attention. And I'm glad they're paying attention to this, because every single time, you know, it would be nice if the UN would, for once, it'll never happen because this is not in their DNA. This is not their purpose of their organization. But to even make fake friendly noises respecting the individual autonomy and freedom of people around the world. But it's never about that. It's always about controlling your life. The United Nations would like nothing more than to have a global permission-only society where people don't really do anything unless they get clearance from whatever government is controlling them at that time, and in their eyes, a global governance. They want that society because the people who will have permission to actually live a decent life are them and the elites and the people who are controlling you. They get to live the way they want, and you will not. You will not be able to live in freedom. You will not be able to have your own car very soon, I really believe, in the United States because, they won't mandate it. They'll just make it so expensive that you can't have personal transportation anymore. These are all the little things moving toward their goal. But the audacity tells you something. The audacity of coming out publicly with a plan like this tells you something very important. They don't fear you. They don't fear being exposed because they believe, and I have not seen a lot of evidence to the contrary, that it's all going to work out anyway, that they're going to be able
Well,
to impose these plans no matter how many people know about it because they have all the power.
Well, at least they called it our common agenda and not like our sinister scheme to take over or something like that, which was essentially what the Great Reset was. But Justin, there are different facets of this that I also want to bring up. One being the Summit of the Future, which is kind of the culminating event of all of this. This is supposedly going to be taking place in September of 2024. Is that correct?
Right. So the plan, the kind of to go to Jim's point, they literally have on the Our Common Agenda website for the United Nations a detailed timeline of events of when all these things have happened and will happen in the Our Common Agenda, universe. And on their, they call it a roadmap to Our Common Agenda, they say that this sort of culminating event when all of the final details go into place and it actually becomes law occurs. They tell us the exact time of when this is going to happen. That's how confident they are. The final sort of agreement is called a Pact for the Future. They've already titled it. That's what it's called, Pact for the Future. It's going to be held in September of 2024 at an event, a UN, I believe, General Assembly event called Summit of the Future, or Summit for, I think it's Summit of the Future, which I think is going to be held in New York. I think they've even got that nailed down of where it's going to be. It's going to be in New York. And according to the United Nations own website, at that event, the member states are going to get together and they're going to sign the Pact for the Future. And exactly just like the Paris Climate Accords are one of those things, except much more sweeping than that. Now, what the details of it are, that's what they're working on right now. They're formally trying to get the details hammered out of what it looks like exactly. That picture right there, that's actually the timeline of events. Started in 2015, ends in 2024. This has been the plan for a while. So it's not a conspiracy theory. It's published on their own website. They've even got the dates and everything all lined up for you. Right. And then some of the incredible things. I mean, when you actually start reading the text of what they're saying in the formal documents, it shows you just how authoritarian and crazy all of this stuff is. So, for example, it says here, this is in the formal emergency platform proposal from the United Nations. This is endorsed by the Secretary General. This isn't some vague thing. This is the official thing from the United Nations. It says, as part of this emergency platform, any response mechanism to a global shock it's referring to must ensure that participating actors, that earlier in this is defined as public or private sector people, make clear commitments that directly and immediately support the global response to a complex shock. This may, for example, include a commitment of financial or technical resources, a commitment to advocate with key actors, and or a commitment to a significant policy shift that would have a meaningful impact on the response. Participants would need to accept accountability for delivering on these commitments. This is the formal proposal. Basically, we get to do whatever we want. Now, who gets to develop? Who's involved? Because of course, this is like the Great Reset. This is a multi-stakeholder, effort. This isn't just the United Nations just on its own. It's going to be inclusive. So under the category of inclusive and multi-stakeholder, it says an emergency platform would be inclusive and allow for the participation of all relevant actors, not all actors, just the relevant ones, with an ability to contribute meaningfully to the global response. This should include relevant actors from all parts of the world, including the private sector, civil society, subject matter experts, academics, and others. Now, that sounds like that's going to be pretty inclusive, doesn't it? Everybody's going to be involved if you're relevant. Well, who's relevant? Well, it tells us who's relevant. Anyone who the Secretary General decides is relevant. It says the Secretary General would be responsible for identifying such relevant actors and for overseeing their contribution to the response. This is literally a formal proposal to create Emperor Palpatine. Like, that's what this is.
What?
It's incredible. It is incredible, right down to how long it lasts. That's decided by the Secretary General. The participating actors, that's decided by the Secretary General. Their commitments that they have to uphold, that's decided by the Secretary General. Holding them to account if they don't actually fulfill the commitments, that's decided by the Secretary General. This is the Secretary General, in case you didn't know, is one person. Like, this is incredible.
You know, if you look at like the edit notes, if you click on the edit notes, there's a part that's scratched out where it talks about in an effort to create the first galactic empire, but they crossed that out. They thought that was too on the nose, so that got left on the editing room floor.
I think they may have actually taken Palpatine's speech from Star Wars and then just tweaked it a little bit. You just play with it and you get to our common agenda.
They're like Secretary General.
Search and replace Emperor with Secretary General. That's pretty much all they do.
Secretary General, what did you mean by, your altercation with the Jedi left you scarred? I don't get that part.
Yeah.
I would just say I'm just struck by the kind of language that I'm sure you recognize, Justin, that's supposed to, assuage people's fears that the Emperor is rising and that the Republic is dying. This common agenda. It's like, who consented to this common agenda? What is this common agenda? Who voted on this? We are talking about this in the same week that we just had Independence Day here in the United States. And, it was to throw off the Emperor. It was to throw off an empire and to create a country and a society based in liberty and respecting the individual to live his or her life with as little government interference as possible. Not just because that's morally right, but it also encourages, as it was doing in the colonies at the time, economic growth and more happiness for everybody. It's in the Declaration of Independence itself, the pursuit of happiness. And the UN is not interested in your happiness. It's not interested in pursuing anybody pursuing their own individual happiness. It is, as the terminology in that document says, the common agenda. And so it's nobody votes on this. Nobody gets any input. We don't, regular plebes don't get any input on the common agenda. The common agenda is the agenda that the global elites all agree upon. And that common agenda always involves more power for themselves, less freedom and liberty for you.
So, Justin, the last part of the article was talking about Biden's support. So I think a lot of people, when they hear the UN or something like that, they have this old mindset that's like, oh, the UN, they just do a lot of talk and they can't actually get anything done. And they just kind of, whatever, get rid of it. But when you have the president of the United States, the administration of the United States in support of the proposal, it gets a little bit more worrisome. Can you explain this aspect of the article?
Yeah. So what's really remarkable about this, and it's really the part of the story that I just can't believe that this hasn't caught on in a lot of ways, is that formally the United States government has said that they endorse the emergency platform specifically, not just generally we like the, our common agenda, but because they have made some statements from ambassadors to the United Nations, U.S. ambassadors to the United Nations have made some statements like, we like our common agenda. There are some things in it that we don't necessarily agree with without telling us what those are, but we like our common agenda. And that kind of gives you an out, so you could say, well, yeah, the emergency platform, we don't like that part. But in two different speeches by U.S. Ambassador Chris Liu, there were, he was part of the Biden administration. He was appointed by Joe Biden for this position. In two different speeches after this came out, he listed it as one of the things that they agree that they like, that one of the things they like is the emergency platform. And there's a whole bunch of other crazy things that they like too, which is also really disturbing, but that's for another time. But that they specifically named it. So I don't even have to imagine. See, that's what's so incredible about this. And it reminds me so much of the Great Reset. When Donnie and I first started reading the detailed stuff in the Great Reset, the most amazing thing about it was how open everybody was about the plan and what the plan was and what they wanted to do. It was just, yeah, we're going to rewrite social contracts. Yeah, we're going to push the reset button on the global economy. We're going to make it all about equity. We're going to have public-private partnerships. We're going to be working with corporations to remake society. They were just openly saying these things. And in the same way that they did it with that, global elites are doing it here, where they're just openly saying, yeah, emergency platform. Oh yeah. Well, Secretary General, we're going to give him all this power and he can just decide when these global shocks end, what a global shock is exactly, who are the relevant actors that make decisions, what those commitments are, holding them to account when they're not fulfilling those commitments. And then Joe Biden comes along and says, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Let's give that guy all the power. It's like, how much more open? They could at least do it behind closed doors, where we don't ever find out about it. They're publishing it on their websites. All you have to do is Google it and you can find this stuff. Okay. So that part of it is the most incredible part of it all. The person who's supposed to, I know Europe is full of a bunch of people that want a global government and tyranny and all that. I know there's a lot of people that don't want it, but I also know there's a lot of people in Europe that do. That's the history of Europe. That's fine. I don't care. I don't live in Europe, but I don't expect the United States of America, I don't expect the president of the United States to be in favor of this. I don't expect that. He's the person who is supposed to say, screw you. I'm not doing that. We're not going anywhere near this. And instead he's saying, yeah, that's pretty good. Let's add that to the list of things that we like. It is so transparent what is going on here and so terrifying. I really hope that people start to pick up on this and run with it and point out how bad this is, because as bad as the Great Reset was, every part of the Great Reset is in this. And a bunch of other things that were not in the Great Reset are also in this. This is the Great Reset plus a bunch of other things. And that's what's so incredible. So if people cared about that, I really hope that they will care even more about this over the long run.